Hi good people, Titus here for another Unreal Engine tutorial, and in this video we'll create a Niagara system ribbon effect that gives the appearance of jittery laser beams. Let's not waste any time and just jump right into it. Alright, so I have this little drone here. It's got some idle animations. We're just going to add a laser system to them. The way we can do that is we will right click, select Niagara system, and for the template I'm going to start with the ribbon shapes template. We'll hit create, and then we'll give it a name, and then double click to open it up. Now right off the bat, we're going to go into the ribbon renderer settings, and I'm going to make some adjustments here. The first one is I'm going to change the material to use the default ribbon material. And then for the facing mode, I'm going to set that to be a screen space facing. And then for the UV settings, we need to remove the tiled. You can use non-uniform or uniform. Either one of those should work. In this case, I'll use non-uniform. And then the next thing we need to do is change the shape from a tube, and I'm just going to use a simple plane. And then for the curve tension, this is like how tight the ribbons are or how loose they are. I'm going to set that to be full, which is 0.99. And then the most important setting is under rendering. There's a motion vector setting. You'll want to flip that to disabled. Otherwise, you're going to get some weird flickering in editor. All right, now that we have that set, we can go into the emitter state. The default settings are actually fine for this. So we'll go ahead and just remove the spawn burst. And then instead of that, we're going to add a spawn rate. And then the spawn rate I'm going to use starting off is just going to be 500. And then for the initialized particles, I'm going to change the color to use a red, and then I'm going to bump that color value to like 300 so it's really bright. And then for the lifetime, I'm going to use a smaller lifetime like 0.1. And then for the ribbon width, I'll start off using a value of 1. And then the facing mode, I'm actually going to set that to unset because we are controlling that in the ribbon renderer. Now for the set particles, we're actually going to delete that one. And for the shape, we'll delete that as well, because we're not going to be using that. We're going to be using a sample skeletal mesh. So for the particle state, let's go ahead and set it to kill particles when lifetime exceeds, so they're not infinite. And then we'll hit the little plus sign next to particle update. And then we can search for the sample skeletal mesh. And then the skeleton, you can use any skeleton. Unreal comes with a skeletal cube default. So I'm going to use that for this demonstration, but you can also import your own skeletons and make adjustments. And I'll show you that here in a second as well, because we're going to modify this default one. And then there is one change we need to make in here. That's the mesh sampling type. Currently it's set to just bones. We want bones and sockets because we're primarily actually going to be doing a lot of it through the sockets. And then the next thing we need is we need the skeletal's particle position. So in the left-hand parameters menu, there is a particle section. You can do particles position and drag that underneath the sample skeletal mesh. And then inside here, we need to add this skeletal mesh. So on the left-hand side in the parameters, you'll see particles sample position for the skeletal mesh. Just drag that into this bottom field here. And then that should get us basically prepared. Now for the skeletal mesh, we have to add some bones and sockets. So let's open our skeletal cube, and we can double click to actually open it up, and then select the skeleton in the top right corner to actually see the bones. Now I'll preface this, you might want to create your own, because if you make any modifications here, you can easily delete them and revert them, but it will change it for all your projects because this is an engine asset. So if you prefer, you can actually copy it as well to a different location and then make modifications to a copy version. But I don't care about editing, so I'm just going to do it on this one. We're going to set the character bones to show the sockets so we can see what we're doing. And then we'll just right click on bone number 2 and we will add our first socket. Now what I want to do is come to front view so I can kind of see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to press W to go to the translate tool. And then I'm just simply going to drag this bone or the socket up by a couple meters just so it's kind of sticking out. And this is going to be kind of where your design comes in. We're basically drawing the path of the lasers. So maybe I'll bump this up a little bit more. We'll go right about there. And then I'm going to hold the Alt key, and I'm just going to drag off that to duplicate the bone. And then I'll hold Alt, and I'll just repeat that a few times to get some different sockets going. And then I can select this middle socket again, hold Alt, drag off, and then just repeat that to give me a few more sockets. So it looks like I need one more to be even. So I think that's going to be the design I go with. So if we go back to perspective, you know, it's not going to be super crazy, but it will demonstrate the effect here. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's head back to our Niagara effect. Now for the Niagara system, for the filtered bones, we're going to just add a single bone. So we'll hit the plus sign, expand it out, and that was bone number 2 that we did this all off of. And you can see that right here. Now on the sockets, we're going to add a few. I can't remember how many we added, but just start and just select the top one, and then we can just start adding them in one by one here. So that's 3. There's 4, so it looks like we got 7. 5, 6, and one more for 7. Okay, so now that we have our bones set up, we can see the effect in the preview window. And let's talk about what adjustments you can make to the effect. So starting off, I'll say there's a couple different options that will transform this. I mean, obviously with the exception of moving the sockets around, right? Because that's going to give you a different shape. But the spawn rate does a pretty good job. If you lower the spawn rate, you can get a much more, I guess, chaotic effect. And if you have more particles, it's a little more stable. In the initialized particles section, the lifetime is another one. If you increase that value, you get more of a stable ribbon effect. And then the lower the value, you get a little bit more flicker. And then I'll do 0.1, so it's really flickery. And then the last one that really does anything is the ribbon width. So if you adjust the width, obviously you're gonna get a chunkier ribbon, so that'll get you a different effect. There's one more that I'll go over actually. Under the ribbon renderer, we adjusted the curve tension. If you lower this, you can get an interesting effect. So maybe you're going for a little bit more of a loose ribbon style, so maybe something like that. But I'm actually going to leave that taut, so we kind of have this sort of effect. All right, so we have our Niagara system. How do we actually use it? Because this one is different, we're using a skeleton. So, of course, if you're using a skeletal mesh for your pawn, you can of course use that. But in this example, I'm not using the skeletal mesh of my pawn. We're using that default cube one. So the way I can make this work is I can add a skeletal mesh, and then in the skeletal mesh properties, make sure I use the skeletal cube that we edited. In this case, it was this one right here, the skeletal cube. And then you'll notice it adds this the little shape here. Now I don't want to show the shape, so we're gonna hide that in game, and we can also hide it in editor. But the one thing you'll notice is it's not following along with my actual pawn. In my pawn, I actually have a socket built in on the front, so I can just simply parent that to the actual socket here, called it I. And now you'll see the cube obviously got a lot bigger because it has to do with the scale, but the cube is now actually moving. So what I can do now is I fortunately have to lower this, and that has to do with my skeletal mesh. When I imported, I didn't set the sizing correctly, but all right, so that works. Now from here, I'm actually going to tell it to hide in game, so it doesn't show up. And then I forget where that, okay, hidden in game and visible. So now it's basically invisible. Now that we have the skeletal cube selected, you can then add the Niagara effect to that as a child. And then because it's a child, it has a skeletal mesh, which means your effect will actually work in game. but you'll notice there's an issue with it. It's not rotated appropriately. So we can select the skeletal cube, and then you just have to work out the rotation. So looks like I need to spin it 90 degrees that way, and then spin it 90 degrees that way to be flat, and then maybe I'll go down 20 degrees. And then for the actual cube, the cube controls how big it's going to be as well as the positioning. So because it's using the bones or the sockets from that actual cube, so we can adjust the scaling factor here. Let's do we'll do 0.1, and then I can't tell, that might be a little bit too small, so maybe I'll try 0.3. And then I just basically need to position the cube back a little bit, so it's kind of just coming from the drone. And then maybe I will lower my grid size to maybe 1, and I'll bring it forward just a smidge. I think that's probably good enough. All right, so now if we compile and save, the effect will actually play in game, so you can see it here. And it'll follow along the drone because it's using that bone socket, so you can basically design kind of any patterns you want. Just as an example, I have some other ones that I did before the video, and I drew some different bone or socket designs. So you can do 3-dimensional, you can do 2-dimensional, you can adjust the color, the width, and get all sorts of different and interesting effects. But all right, everyone, I think we'll cut the video here to keep it short, but I hope you found some informative value that you can take into your projects. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.